Yeah.
Look like you're inside the sun.
I'm Chuck Black, and this is the Age of Ingenuity, our weekly chronicle of Canada's current innovation economy. And here's what's happening. We live in a world where innovators can't get funding without sending the right press releases to the right media dinosaurs, who mostly don't have the resources to fact check the content. It's called Science by Press Release, and we're going to take a look at it.
I'm Alan Calder, and I think the legacy media has more on its mind than just fact-checking free articles provided by organizations with ulterior motives. Maybe Google will give them enough money to survive. Google has promised to give the media at least some money, and we're going to talk about that.
I'm Brian Orlotti, and I want to calmly remind everyone to like, subscribe, share, comment, and support this vidcast financially on Patreon and PayPal. Your contributions will allow us to fund and distribute our stories in a more effective and honest manner than seems possible within the confines of our current legacy media. Speaking of which, here are the stories we're currently tracking. And our first piece comes from BetaKit, titled Ontario Supercluster Invests Over $6 Million in 3 COVID-Related Projects by Megan Simpson. Ontario-based supercluster Next Generation Manufacturing Canada, NGen, is set to announce today the investment of more than $6 million in 3 projects from Canadian companies focused on fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. The investments include Kitchener-based Cloud DX, Boisbriand, Quebec-based Exicad, and Toronto's Myent. The companies will be receiving a collective $6.05 million for 3 separate projects.
Just to be clear, the Next Gen press release on June 23rd confirmed the award and said everything was moving forward. It's under the title Advanced Manufacturing Supercluster, funds over $6 million in projects to fight COVID-19, and we'll include that with the show notes. And I'd also suggest that perhaps this is just the latest in a long series of funding announcements related to COVID-19. COVID-19 is trendy.
I wonder why, how much of this is a medical decision and how much of this is a manufacturing business decision.
Well, COVID-19 research is where the money is right now. I'd suggest the goal is, I call it science by press release. I'd refer to the June 22nd, 2020 Globe and Mail post. It's related as an opinion, but it talks about the perils of science by press release. And it notes that science follows the money. Academics need to make a living. And you can't get money for research without suggesting that your research project is vitally important and already virtually completely successful, except for filling out the paperwork. So you fill out the paperwork, you send it out in the mass media, and then you get more money because promotion requires the hyping of unproven treatments from powerful political pulpits and breathless reporting on even the most mundane developments. You know this, Al, you're a salesman.
Well, I was going to say more like, Chuck, when I used to train all a year, self-included as a sales guy, I always used to relate it to picking up people at a bar, right?
Yeah.
Like always like that, because it's all about the relationship and that kind of thing. This reminds me more about the kind of bullshit I would spew to some drunk girl at a bar than anything.
What do you think about this, Brian?
I'm with you, Chuck. I think that it's startups like academics follow the money. They got bills to pay like everybody else, and if stamping COVID-19 on your project will get them to write the check, then so be it.
Yeah,
yeah.
It's funny actually. So I also wrote this article about this back in the day with Chuck. You may be aware then.
I'm not positive, but I think that's the August 9th, 2018 commercial space blog post titled, "Could space industry funding come from Canada's new cannabis industry?" And the answer was yes, absolutely. Cannabis is trendy then.
Yeah. Sorry, Chuck. I didn't mean to jump to the punchline.
No, that's okay. Al, you also follow the money, and you also need to make a living. So this is what you do.
There's this, right?
Yeah, I would suggest this trend is so all-encompassing and so all crazy that even peer-reviewed scientific papers are being pulled from major journals over the last little while for jumping the gun. And for that, I note the June 22nd, 2020 Globe and Mail post, Perils of Science by Press Release. It talks explicitly about 3 peer-reviewed scientific papers pulled from major journals. The New England Journal of Medicine, the Lancet, and the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. And these articles were published and then retracted for a number of reasons. They were published because they were trendy. Oddly enough, they were all about COVID-19. And they were pulled because, well, in one case, the data set used by the research paper wasn't made available to the peer reviewers. And sometimes they thought the methodology sucked.
So they had crappy planning and no results that they can prove. Like, why were they putting it in the paper in the first place? Seriously.
Well, you get it published. You get a lot of money from a major corporation or from an academic institution, and the proof that you spent the money correctly is publication in this major peer-reviewed journal.
Publish or perish, right?
Yeah.
What I mean, I think maybe I misspoke. What I meant to say though is, why would they publish it if they wouldn't release the data that it was so important to review on? Like, why wouldn't they though?
There are actually official reasons why you don't make the data set available. Sometimes the data sets aren't shared because of legal requirements officially relating to trade secrets or copyrights. That's one of the reasons why you don't release the methodologies. And of course, sometimes you guys go.
No, but the results though, if this is like medically relevant stuff though, you know, like, it's part of the process of being a company that you're involved in this whole thing, the peer reviewing. Then you got to play the game.
I would argue that there was once a process 5 and 10 and 15 years ago. But there's a lot of money in science these days. And it's not just scientists who are looking for a big score. What was it? The three publications, the New England Journal of Medicine published an article showing that heart drugs were safe for use by COVID-19 patients with heart conditions. And that peer-reviewed paper, they wouldn't give up the data set used to demonstrate their points. And when they eventually did give up the data sets, the paper, the data was considered dubious. The paper was retracted on June 4th. In the case of the Lancet retracted a high-profile study showing that the highly touted drugs hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine were ineffective in treating COVID-19 and caused harm to patients. The editor of the Lancet said that the data sets used weren't just dubious, they were an out-and-out fabrication and a fraud. But the fabrication and fraud was impossible to detect in the peer review process. I don't know how they figured it out it was a fraud, but the Lancet retracted it anyway.
I wonder if they didn't have access to data, like, how did they assume it was a fraud statistically somehow?
I don't know. I have a link to the study itself, but there's no real reason why the study was retracted. And in the last case, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, they published an article which, according to the Globe article, made wild claims about the benefits of masks for preventing transmission of coronavirus. And scientists have demanded that it be retracted, although it hasn't yet been retracted. Scientists say it features egregious errors and verifiably false statements. The Globe article in this case provides no link to primary source material, so it can't even independently verify this. And I'm thinking it might be for copyright purposes or any one of a number of other things. But again, that suggests another one of the problems with these peer-reviewed scientific journals. It's very hard for somebody independent to actually independently verify that. The peer review process is no good unless somebody has enough information to do the experiment independently and come up with equivalent results.
100% agree with that. I don't know how they couldn't possibly verify it without those, unless they have some expensive study they perform on their own independently, the same as has been done prior. It seems like a lot of work to have data that they've already had produced.
I tend to agree. And there's a lot of this. I've read studies that indicate that only 50% of the studies published in peer-reviewed journals are verifiable and reproducible. So all these peer-reviewed journals, they have all this data that they've put together into logical conclusions through experimental evidence, and half of them, maybe less than half of them, are reproducible. So the what do you think about that? Scientific evidence that may or may not be reproducible.
Huh.
Brian, you got to do more than stick your tongue in your mouth.
I don't want to take any drugs based off of studies like that.
No, I agree.
That's what 50% of the studies are not verifiable. That seems like an inordinately high amount, though. That's not a bookkeeping mistake, though. That's like half of them.
Agreed. I wish we had more time to go into that. It's a fairly egregious error in the scientific process these days. When I was a kid, we were taught science is verifiable independently, and evidently that it costs so much money to do, so none of us can reproduce it.
The process has not changed, Chuck. They're just not doing it. They just don't
Maybe
care
not.
anymore.
Maybe not.
That's obviously that's what's happening. I can't think of another way to describe it.
I would suggest that we're not the only people who've noticed this. For that, I referenced the June 25th, 2020 Wired post. Peer-reviewed scientific journals don't really do their job. The rapid sharing of pandemic research shows there is a better way to filter good science from bad. And this argued mostly that the future of peer review is in the mass media, not through publications of record. I think it's press release science, because mass media helps make the money flow, and the work receives a wider distribution through mass media, which helps make the money flow. So you might as well cut out the people who are at least trying to do peer review.
Yeah, Stevie the scientists, then I guess we'll call them. Is that the theory too? Right?
Yeah, I think science shouldn't be left to scientists.
Well, then who should be left to then?
I don't know. I don't know. I would argue that our problems may be the result of a mostly centralized top-down approach to supporting the science innovation ecosystem. Everybody needs funding, and that funding often comes from only a few well-defined sources. I would suggest that anybody who's watched this vidcast for any length of time knows that we spend a lot of time talking about government sources of funding. But for anybody who wants to know more, I'd suggest going to the Innovation Canada website. It'll be included in the show notes. There are academic sources of funding, the various university programs that are mostly available on research websites and university websites. There's also a lot of money from the private sector. And for that, I would suggest the 2019 Research InfoSource listing of the top 100 R&D spenders. I don't think it's well known, but 60% of the real R&D comes through industry, not through government, not through universities. I think that's, most people who I tell that to are actually really surprised. And then there's various peripheral organizations like MITEX who do combinations of grants for education and government and private sector, but there's a lot of money available.
Does that, Chuck, I wonder, how can you differentiate between, say, a corporation donating to a school or paying for in-house research then? And you know what I mean? Like if they have the new Alan Calder wing of the university, and they're doing science I like in that, I'm just trying to, you know what I mean? Though the line is blurry between those things, I believe.
I would tend to agree. I would note the original announcement that Brian read earlier about the COVID-19 funding, and that's being provided through the Canadian Supercluster program, which is another component of government funding for research and innovation. It was actually started out as one of the Trudeau government's election promises to build a nation of innovators. So we're all innovators. We're all lining up waiting for government funding, and that makes us innovators.
Merci beaucoup.
uh, one of the books I've noted recently on innovation, it's been my favorite book for the last couple of weeks. It's something called How Innovation Works. It's a book by Matt Ridley. And he essentially sees innovation as an incremental, bottom-up, fortuitous process, sometimes accidental, that happens as a direct result of the human habit of exchange, rather than as an orderly, top-down process developed according to a plan, which seems to be exactly the opposite of how all these innovation government programs work. What do you guys think about that?
Well, that's what else. A government can't be the little guy. You know, they don't know how to be the little guy.
Yeah, it's fair.
Not,
you go, Brian.
And governments aren't exactly trained to think out of the box.
Yeah, nor they're not trained to think at all, to be honest. Like they don't need to think. You know, they just need to be popular. That's what I thought of that article. They only need to be popular, not right.
How about I agree with that? Governments don't necessarily need to be right. They just need to be reelected. That's a component of popularity.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was getting at. You know.
Yeah.
Just because Trudeau gets reelected doesn't make him popular. It doesn't give him popular support, sort of idea, I guess.
But the Trudeau government giving lots of money to innovation companies gains them a certain amount of political credibility. They know that if they keep voting for him, they'll get their money every year or something. Same thing like the 600 million. You go.
Companies don't vote, Chuck.
Well, the people vote, and the people get their jobs.
Yeah.
And companies contribute campaign funding, which allows a political party to get its word out.
That's exactly what I was getting at.
And next up is a piece from CBC titled, "Google Will Start Paying Some News Publishers for Content. Move could pave way for reduced tensions between internet search and beleaguered news industry," from the Associated Press. Google says it will start paying some publishers for their news content in a move that could pave the way for reduced tensions between the internet search giant and the beleaguered news industry. The company said Thursday that it plans to launch this year a licensing program to pay publishers for high-quality content. The program will start with local and national publications in Germany, Australia, and Brazil, with more to come soon, Brad Bender, Vice President of Product Management, said in a blog post.
I think it's important to note that CBC expects explicitly to gain revenue from this deal if it ever rolls out in Canada. I don't know how it'll affect anybody else in Canada, but CBC expects to make money off of it.
Oh, that's fine then. Like, who gives a shit then if they can make money off that? Doesn't the government own them? Yeah, the government. I'm right.
Well, at least it's something. I mean, you know, the old saw is the two biggest content stealers on the internet are Google and Facebook, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. But I how do I put this delicately, gentlemen? Wouldn't you rather Google and Facebook pay us rather than our direct competitors?
I wouldn't mind.
What kind of stupid question is that, Chuck? No, I'd rather they just take it all, to be honest.
I think it's fair to note, however, that not all agree that the program will help the legacy news providers. And for that, I reference the June 25th, 2020 Newman Lab post. Google paying publishers is more about PR than the needs of the news industry.
Yeah.
And most of the content Google provides, according to Google, is tracked through its search function, and Google doesn't consider it to be news. It considers it to be mostly informational, like searching for the best compact SUV, or the various cures for balding, or in my case, perhaps hot bikini models. But it doesn't necessarily perceive of traditional news as being a substantial portion of the search queries. The news organizations argue that the news is qualitative and not quantitative, and qualitative news searches like the one CBC is hoping to get paid for, they should have a higher fiscal value.
how would they rank that? Let me guess. CBC decides that it's a 9.5 out of 10 in dollar value for their news stories. Like, that's the multiplier, you know? Like, who gets to decide how quality the news is then? Like, what are the criteria, I wonder?
I would suggest in Canada, it's everybody who got a portion of the $600 million media bailout fund a year and a half ago.
So then we're talking about these big tech giants then tossing back some money to the CBCs of the world then? So
Well,
the
not just
government,
CBC, the Globe and Mails as well, the Toronto Star,
so they don't
the
bitch.
traditional media. I think it's important to note that Google and the other major tech companies are also scrambling to generate positive PR in response to recent pressure from civil rights organizations objecting to the type of coverage they allow on their platforms. And this is as outlined in the June 26, 2020 New York Times post, brands boycotting Facebook ads over hate speech.
New York Times, really? Like, they're the publication of record for morality too, are they?
Well, they're arguing that Facebook in particular is being too polite to Trump, and we should ban him unequivocally, even though he's president. I think that no matter how bad he is, if they elect him president, he should be allowed to speak.
It's more of a reflection of the system that's broken than anything.
Yes. I would also suggest that the legacy media has been bleeding cash since about 2008 when their business model collapsed.
Well, how are they still in business then, Chuck?
Well, the New York Times sold its building. Other companies have sold a lot of their stuff. I think the Globe and Mail even sold its printing presses and outsourced everything. So you get a big hunk of cash, and then you operate at a loss until you run out of money, and then you take out a bank loan, and then you end up in the same position as Post Media, owned by a bunch of other people, and having to pay more money to them every month for your loans than you get to pay to your staff.
Or how's this? Maybe the Washington Compost, who gets bought out by the richest person who has ever existed, then, as a PR agency.
You're not the only one who's suggesting that. You're laughing, Brian. Why do you think that's funny?
Well, it's what's the old saying? Freedom of speech only costs you as much as a printing press. I think that's the exact slogan. So yeah, I mean, Jeff Bezos gets to use the storied Washington Post brand and spew his point of view, and
have his sleazebag friends give like op-eds about things they don't know anything about, you know, to keep their name in the news. Like, it's such a rig now.
What sleazebag friends? I don't read the Washington Post regularly.
The guy who was running their the Clinton campaign, who was like the Hillary Clinton's like chief advisor for the campaign.
Stephanopoulos?
No, like the one who was like connected to like him and his two brothers had an agency, like a PR agency though. That they were, you know what? I'll look it up actually later then, and I'll be embarrassed that I didn't think of it at the time.
Podesta?
Right. Pardon? Yes, 100%. Yes, correct.
John Podesta.
The Podesta brothers. Yeah, Podesta, exactly. Who's been writing for the Washington Post now.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, well, he is. He was on staff actually.
I would argue that having a rich patron is a legitimate model for a news organization. Bezos pays them money, and they write whatever he wants them to write.
Popular and legitimate aren't the same thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt.
If they're not breaking the rules, they don't exist.
And those are the stories we're covering this week. As always, the articles we've referenced are listed in the show notes. Keep in touch with us on Facebook, Gab, LinkedIn, Minds, Pinterest, Steemit, and Twitter. Check out other stories we're tracking on our innovation news and upcoming event Scoop It feeds. And remember to like, subscribe, share, and comment on our posts. Your actions will feed the algorithms and bots which help to distribute our stories.
If you'd like to promote your event or your activity, or if you think you have insight into Canada's current innovation economy, please send me an email. I'm at chuck.black@protonmail.com.
And we're currently on YouTube, BitChute, and Vimeo, and hope to be on other platforms soon. If you like the content we create, send money to our Patreon and PayPal accounts. For only $10 a month, you can view the raw footage that goes into creating every episode.
And that's all for this week. We'll be back next week with more stories covering our current Age of Ingenuity.